All right, it's 10 a.m. We will call the October 2, 2023 meeting of the Mackinac Straits Corridor Authority to order. Welcome to all of our guests. The first item on the agenda is approval of the agenda. Do I have a motion for its approval?
I'll move.
It's been moved. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Second item is approval of the June 5, 2023 meeting minutes. We have a motion. Well, I'm just going to say, all in favor of approval? The meeting minutes are approved, and my commendation to their author on how detailed they are. Next item on the agenda, item 4.1, under old business, is the August 11, 2023 letter from Enbridge regarding FERC filing and Fiscal Responsibility Act. I don't know that there's much we need to do with respect to this, but other than note that it has been received, unless I think if someone from Enbridge wanted to make any statements about it, that's not saying you have to. The letter kind of speaks for itself. So seeing the head nod, I'm just assuming that we will reflect that that correspondence has been received. The next old business item on the agenda is an update on PFN third-party utility agreement. To that, we'll start with Mr. Howd.
Thank you, Chairman Novak. When we were last here, we discussed some language that PFN and the staff of the authority were discussing, and we wanted to get some direction before we finalized the agreement. And essentially, the proposed language would be that PFN would have the exclusive right to place fiber optic lines in the tunnel, and that it would be until such time as it reached its capacity. And the language talked about PFN will provide to all requesting third parties open access to fiber optic cables within the facilities on a non-discriminatory basis. PFN would charge third parties standard rates that are based on the underlying cost of the service and the fiber optic cable to which PFN provides access. PFN would also charge third parties on a most favored customer basis, so that a rate charged to one customer would be no different than the rate charged to all customers. In exchange, then the authority would not grant to any other third-party utility companies the use of the tunnel to place fiber optic lines until such time as PFN reached its capacity. The language also would allow the placement of fiber optic cable in the tunnel by a federal or state department for its own use for the purpose of homeland or national security or public disasters, emergencies, or public emergencies. This board had several questions at the last meeting, including whether or not that provision would violate antitrust provisions. I worked with the Corporate Oversight Division in the Attorney General's office on this matter, and although they weren't able to share their memo with me, we had a discussion, and they indicated that because of those provisions, the fact that there are other competitors in the industry, and that PFN will charge the standard rates and will not discriminate against any third party that wants to use any of the lines, that they did not believe that there was any antitrust violations. Last week, I received an antitrust analysis that was performed by Warner Norcross on behalf of the PFN, and I asked the Corporate Oversight Division to take a look at that, and they agreed with both the analysis and the conclusions contained in that memo. I also talked with the Mackinac Bridge Authority. They have 144 strands of fiber optic crossing the bridge, and they currently have leases with Charter and Merit. And their charges reflect solely the cost of maintaining those lines on the bridge. They both have indicated that they would be interested in leasing lines for redundancy in the tunnel should PFN place its fiber optic lines in, and also indicated that the Mackinac Bridge Authority still has capacity, and was didn't really think that there was a demand at this time to utilize all of the fiber optic lines, both at the Mackinac Bridge and then also if PFN were to place its fiber optic lines in the tunnel. Yeah.
Thank you for that report. I wanted to make sure we had an opportunity, or wanted to extend an opportunity to representatives of PFN if they also wanted to speak on this topic or address further points to what Ray just summarized.
Hey, Chairman Nomek, one last thing. We're here, ultimately this board will be voting on whether to enter into a third-party use agreement with PFN. The purpose of getting, of this discussion is to get some feedback from the board on whether or not to move forward with this exclusivity language as part of the overall agreement.
Okay.
So thank you. We agree wholeheartedly with
Sorry. We agree wholeheartedly with everything that was just shared. I've presented to the commission some background on PFN, how we operate, how the telecommunications industry operates, and I'll be glad to go in more detail into those slides if you wish. However, if you have any questions specific to what was just shared by your council, I'll be glad to answer them for you. But we're in support. It sounds like we're heading down the same road together, and we'd like to see a consummation of an agreement. So I'm glad to answer any questions, or I can certainly go through my presentation if you wish.
Any questions?
Not for you, sir, at this time, but I do have a couple questions for Ray.
Okay. But I do have a couple questions, and then maybe we can go back to Ray. The first is the language that Ray recited seems to me to be, it's got non-discriminatory in there, which indicates that you will not be charging discriminatory rates to any entities that may be leasing a portion of the capacity that you would have in the bridge, as I understand it. Frequently, for essential facilities in different industries, there's a kind of a legal phrase that is typically included in contractual obligations between parties under circumstances similar to this, which is fair, reasonable, and non-discriminatory, or FRAND. The language that you have proposed seems to meet the intent of everything, as far as I can tell, that is encapsulated in the phrase fair, reasonable, and discriminatory. But as I understand it, there might be some hesitancy for PFN to actually just say in the contractual language that they would provide capacity to other providers on a fair, reasonable, and non-discriminatory basis. First, am I mischaracterizing your guys' position, or do you have a hesitation about simply saying that?
I think we had hesitation early on in the process, trying to get to some language that would be satisfactory to everybody, but I believe we're there. We're very, very close to it. So I'm not sure that hesitancy is still there.
Okay. And just to probe a little bit further, if the language actually said exactly that, fair, reasonable, and non-discriminatory, would you be comfortable with that?
I think I have to defer to my external counsel
Sure.
to make sure that they are comfortable with it. But I believe that we're going to reach that crossroad with the commission here. So I'm very optimistic.
Okay. Second question, in discussions with other providers, are you aware of whether they have an understanding that you intend to build out this capacity in the tunnel? And I think I saw something that indicated that you already have a couple takers in terms of entities that have an interest in leasing out a portion of your capacity. I'm not sure leasing is the proper term, but you get the gist of what I'm asking. How widespread in the industry is it known that you're intending to build out this capacity?
It's very widespread. We've been public about our interest for quite a while. It's a small group of telecommunications providers in Michigan, and we all talk and we all do a lot of business together. So it's been known for a while that it's been known what our intention has been.
Okay. And the reason I ask that is before you give someone exclusivity, the one slight concern I have is that there might be others in the industry that say, hey, we would have loved to have done that. And one reaction could be, well, you've had 6 years to do it, or 5 years to do it, while PFN was approaching the authority to actually implement it, and you never came to us. The second reaction could be, well, we never actually went out and published or provided notice to those other industry actors that there was an opportunity to do this. And so the reason I ask about whether they are aware of it is to really address that second concern. We haven't, as far as I know, provided any type of public notice to other potential carriers that they could also propose doing this. And in the absence of doing that, I wanted to know how widespread the knowledge was in the industry that this opportunity was out there.
So I believe that another provider expressed some initial interest very early on in the process, but they never followed through in making a formal, I'm going to use the term application, I'm not sure that's correct, but making a formal request to the commission. So it's well known in the industry that there's a possibility of this tunnel being placed, and PFN may be a participant in it. I think the industry supports that activity, and we look forward to hopefully making it happen.
There is a telecommunication trade association that is one venue where communications about this type of stuff takes place. Is that fair?
There's a state one, and there's multiple national venues.
Okay.
Yes.
Do you know if there has been any publication of the prospect of this going forward at the state level one?
I don't know how to answer that question for you because I'm not sure. Certainly, PFN has been brought up in this and before this body multiple times.
Right.
It appears in your meeting minutes. It appears if they want to stream the video and watch the proceedings, it's there. So nothing's been hidden about our interest or our participation in this process. So, has anyone in a public body gone out and advertised or issued an RFP? I don't think so, but I'm not sure that's necessary.
Right. I was wondering
I mean,
more
quite frankly, if you're in my space and you have my job and you don't know this is going on, you shouldn't be in the job.
Okay. All right. Those are all the questions I had. I think you had some questions for Ray.
Well, actually, I had a couple of follow-up questions because,
Okay.
when I read the material that was provided, and thank you very much for it, it took very seriously the questions that we raised last time. The legal analysis, I think, by Warner was very fairly presented, that, at least personally speaking, would greatly inform decision-making. So thank you for that. One of the questions, though, that I had in reading the material is about your business model. And I do not want to get into commercially proprietary areas, but why is it in your business interests to install the telecommunications equipment and provide the services here? That's part A. And part B is, why do you think, following up on what the chairperson was asking, there have been no other telecommunication companies that want to do the same thing that you want to do?
Sure. So let me answer the second part first, if I can. PFN operates in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan and the Lower Peninsula of Michigan. There's a small group of companies that operate in both areas. And the ones that do, we already partner with, and we share fiber optic capacity and so forth. So you don't have a whole lot of companies that want to do that themselves, because there just aren't that many of us that operate on both sides of the straits. And I think your first question was, why are we in the business we're in?
Well, why is it in your? I think your answer just kind of telegraphed what the answer to question A is, but stated simply, why is it in your business interest to actually, use the tunnel to provide the services? But why don't you just answer the question?
Sure. So the services that PFN provides are critical services. One of the very large things we do for the state of Michigan is we provide next generation 911. We transit almost all the 911 calls in the state, about 5 million a year. Those have to cross the straits very frequently. And when you take on the burden, when you take on the responsibility of handling all the 911 calls for the state of Michigan, those calls have to be delivered where they need to go. There's no plan B for that. You have to fulfill that obligation to the state. Well, in order to do that successfully and with a higher level of comfort, you have to have more than one route over the straits. And today there's just one route, and that's over the Mackinac Bridge.
Gotcha.
So the tunnel will give us a second route. If anybody was driving over the bridge yesterday, it was backed up. And you have the same issue with telecommunications, that if you only have one path, that's not really a good plan. You really need to have at least a second and maybe a third other route to fulfill that obligation.
Thank you.
You're
I
welcome.
was just curious about why.
Sure.
Now I understand. Can I ask a couple of questions to Ray, Mr. Chairperson? Ray, can you please let us know about the timing of contractual drafting, negotiations, and when you expect something formally to come before this entity?
I believe that we could conclude it before the end of the year, for sure.
Mm-hmm. And, sir, are there any timing issues about which you're concerned so that our decision-making in terms of the pace of it can be more informed?
We'd like to have a conclusion by the end of the year also. We understand there may be some changing in staff, so it'd be great to wrap this up while we have the present bodies that we've been working with for a long time still in place.
Leaving aside what you just referred to, the change of staff or possible change of staff, is there a business need that you have to have the contract negotiated and executed by a date certain?
Only that it'd be good to wrap it up. Since we've been pursuing it for 5 years, it's kind of the time to either we need to do it or we're not. But do I have an urgent? It's many, many years before we'll be able to put our fiber in the tunnel, right? So in that regard, there's not a hurry, but we'd sure like to wrap up this part of business.
Thank you for your candor.
You're welcome.
Thanks. Any other questions? Okay. Thanks for your presentation and for the materials. They've been extremely informative. Our next agenda item under new business number 3 is the August 18, 2023 letter from Enbridge regarding the Army Corps permitting process. Did representatives, I'll make the same observation I did on the earlier letter. Did representatives of the company want to speak to this item or only reflect that the correspondence had been received? Oh, did I? Oh, I'm sorry. I skipped over Ryan, who was going to, oh, I've skipped over a couple things. 2A, the MPSC, we get a permitting update from Ray Howd.
And the project risk.
Project risk.
Okay. All right. Sorry for getting way ahead of myself. We'll start with the project risk analysis update with Mike Mooney, Ray Howd, and Ryan. I'm ambitious about cutting the meeting short, I guess. It's a gorgeous day, and I put golf clubs in my car just in case.
Good morning. Okay, so upon the board's directive from the last meeting, I should mention I'm Mike Mooney, tunnel consultant to the authority. So upon the board's directive from the last meeting, we assembled a risk assessment team for the authority. This included Ryan Mitchell, Ray Howd, Dan Cooper, pipeline expert front left there, Don Wotring over in the middle back, a tunnel expert, Rick Liptak, Chief Bridge Construction Engineer for MDOT. Member Doctoroff participated in the group. Margaret Barandes is right there with MDOT Environmental, and myself. So we held a series of meetings and workshops. Enbridge and its consultants, Arup, its designer of record, and WSP, its owner's engineer, participated. We examined risks to the authority. We identified possible risks in categories of cost risk, really 4 categories: cost, environmental risk, health and safety, and reputational risk. And I should back up. I realize that you're fully aware of what I'm about to say as a bit of a preamble, but it is a public meeting, and maybe part the professor in me wants to just set the baseline here, just to remind everyone that risk in the context of engineering is defined as the probability of occurrence multiplied by of a negative event multiplied by the consequence of when that event occurs. So probability of occurrence ranges from extremely low or improbable to all the way up to expected, and the consequence ranges from very low to very high and is different for each category. So cost, environmental, health, and safety, reputation. The consequences differ in those 4 different environments. Risk assessment, identification, management is a routine process on all infrastructure construction projects. So the discussion of risk is quite normal and quite healthy. We all, in our personal lives, to put it in context for all of us, we all identify, manage, and accept risk every day. Driving poses a health and safety risk, a cost risk, depending on your insurance situation. A house remodel presents a cost risk. Our food choices, our exercise choices, just are examples of everyday how we assess risk and how we accept risk. So there exists risks everywhere, including on all infrastructure construction projects and really on all operating infrastructure. I think I was reminded of that as driving across the bridge today, seeing all that work underway and all the different ways in which risk exists for the authority for the Mackinac Bridge. So with that in mind, I'll summarize. We'll do a bit of a team approach here to summarize the risks that we reviewed and assessed. I'll start with the technical risks, and then I'll turn it over to Ryan, who will discuss some of the other risks. And I'm really conveying the group's consensus on these items. So in technical risks, I'll summarize 8 or 9 of the risks that we looked into, identified, and assessed. The first one really pertains to quality control, quality assurance. The authority becomes the owner for this tunnel, yet is not responsible for the design or construction. That direct responsibility lies with Enbridge and its designer and contractor. And quality management, quality control, quality assurance is always a source of conflict and a challenge on construction projects. For anyone that's been involved in those recognizes that. So, and it's really boils down to a financial risk when dealing with quality management. So specifically on the project, there's a risk of, we looked into the risk of, let's say, inadequate quality management by the contractor who will build the tunnel and or Enbridge as perceived by the authority. So this risk is addressed by the tunnel agreement that establishes the independent quality assurance contractor. This is funded by Enbridge to ensure that the tunnel is built according to industry practice and to the technical specifications which follow standard of care, standard of practice, and were developed jointly by the authority and Enbridge. This risk is also addressed by subsequent agreement during this process over the past 3 months to conduct QC/QA workshops and to build strong communications between Enbridge contractor and the IQA, independent quality assurance contractor, and the overall authority. A second quality risk would be the risk that the IQA has inadequate access to the documents from the project and to the site to perform its duty. So this is addressed, ultimately, this is addressed by the fact in the tunnel agreement that ownership transfers to the authority, and that transfer of ownership is tied to satisfactory completion of the construction in accordance with the specifications, which has to be essentially stamped by the IQA. So it's inherent in the tunnel agreement that the IQA must have access to the site, access to documents to essentially ensure that the tunnel has been constructed according to specifications. So that is a risk mitigation measure there. It's also addressed by the agreement, as I mentioned earlier, to conduct workshops to really beef up communications and build strong communications, formal communications throughout the project between the authority and Enbridge and its contractor. So moving on with regard to quality, there's always a risk that the authority has a dispute with the IQA contractor. The IQA contractor will be an independently hired entity. And so if there's a dispute between the authority and the IQA due to perceived inadequate IQA by the authority, so this will be addressed by, or is addressed by clear dispute language, will be addressed by clear dispute language in the contract with the IQA, as well as by engaging a full-time project manager during construction on behalf of the MSCA. So those sort of are the quality management. I'm sure maybe Ryan will touch on quality as well when I turn over the microphone. Moving on then, any design, another risk we looked into was the risk that any design aspect causes performance problems during construction or during the service life of the project. So as an example, just to put context to that, a design aspect would be perhaps the segmental gaskets that are designed between the precast segments. When the segments are installed in the tunnel, they essentially compress together. Those gaskets provide the way to keep the external water outside of the tunnel. And so if there's any aspects with design of those that cause challenges during construction or during the 99-year service life of the tunnel, it's one example. Other examples are the durability assumptions that are in prevailing standard of practice design. So there's many, potential examples I could give for this. These risks are mitigated in a number of ways. One, they're addressed by Enbridge's hiring of Arup as the designer of record. Arup, as we've discussed before, is a world-class tunnel design firm and has dealt with many of these issues in high water pressure tunnels, as well as hiring of WSP as the owner's engineer to perform formal design review. WSP as an independent, also world-recognized tunnel design firm and geotechnical firm. So that's the first key mitigation effort there. These issues are also, in terms of risk to the authority, addressed in the tunnel agreement by Enbridge requirement, the Enbridge requirement to maintain the tunnel throughout and carry the cost of maintaining the operations and service life of 90 years of the tunnel. So even if there were, say, degradation of the tunnel gaskets or infiltration increasing, all of those costs would be borne by Enbridge as part of the tunnel agreement to maintain the service life over the 99 years. Further, there's a number of provisions in the specifications that require testing requirements for the segmental lining. I'm focusing here on the segmental lining because that's really the key asset that ownership transfers to the authority, is the tunnel itself, the tunnel lining. And so there's a number of test requirements of the lining design prior to going into full production of those segments. So testing for fire resistance, testing for thrust jack loading from a tunnel boring machine, just to confirm design assumptions made during that process. So with that, the group feels that risk has been addressed satisfactorily. Moving on, we looked into the risk of damaged tunnel lining during construction that would reduce the lining durability and the service life of the tunnel. Again, in a similar way, this has been addressed, one, by adherence to specifications, which is required for acceptance, and the establishment of the independent quality assurance contractor that will oversee that process. It's also addressed by Enbridge's fiduciary requirement to carry the cost to achieve the 99-year service life. So when thinking about the risk to the authority, those cost risks have been essentially mitigated through those aspects that are defined in the tunnel agreement. Moving on to the next risk we considered was the risk of tunnel or shaft water inundation during construction. So I'm going to shift now into the construction of the tunnel. So during construction, we looked into the risk, or we assessed the risk of tunnel shaft water inundation during construction that would flood the tunnel. This would pose a health and safety risk, of course, to workers, cost risk, delay due to delay, and potential environmental risk. So first of all, this is addressed in the design of the tunnel. In the south portal, all construction will initiate from the south portal, or the south shore, I should say, in a portal to the north shore. And so the first source of water would be to storm event to fill through the south portal. That south portal, the design of it has been recessed into the ground, so there's no ramp ingress of water to flow in there, and it's going to be covered with a temporary structure. And so with additional sump pumps there, that risk of water inundation due to a flood event has been addressed. And then secondly, water coming from within the tunnel at the tunnel boring machine, that's been mitigated through the specification, the requirement of a slurry pressure balanced tunnel boring machine, which we've talked lots about in the past. I'm happy to go in any more details or come back to those. But the prescription of a slurry pressure balanced tunnel boring machine counterbalances the water pressure, and has seals in the system that are designed to 1.5 times the maximum anticipated water pressure of 17 bar at the deepest portions of the tunnel. So with that, the risks of tunnel shaft water inundation have been addressed. Moving on, again, during construction, we looked into the risks of delays during construction, and this could be for myriad reasons on tunnel construction projects where delays occur. So this poses a cost risk to the authority, any sort of delay, and Ryan will speak to delay events soon. Much of this is out of the control of the authority, the direct control, in the sense that the contractor is building the tunnel, Enbridge as the owner until the tunnel is transferred. So as part of the discussion over the past 3 months, in fact, I think member Doctoroff suggested this to establish, and this was agreed upon by the group, Enbridge as well, to establish interaction, formal interaction during construction via stakeholder working committee with the authority, Enbridge, and contractor, just specifically for aspects such as foreseeing delays and mitigating any delay risk that would come up on the project. Moving on, again, during construction, we looked into the risk of a construction event that would require access to the tunnel through the lake. So, of course, the tunneling initiates from the South Shore, has no interaction with the water whatsoever, the lake whatsoever. And so we explored the risk of a construction event that would require access to the tunnel through the lake. And so that risk has been mitigated first by increasing the excavated diameter of the tunnel. If you recall, out of feasibility, it was around 12-foot diameter. The excavated diameter will be 25 feet. And by increasing that diameter, it enabled the designer to specify a number of tools on the tunnel boring machine that allow for drilling at the face of the cutter head, grouting at the face of the cutter head, and essentially specifying that the key elements of the tunnel boring machine, if they were to have challenges or damage, could be replaced from inside the tunnel. So this has been specified now that in the project documents that the tunnel boring machine must be fixed from within the tunnel, which eliminates the need to go in through the lake. I should also just make a note there that in the event that something like that were to occur, of course, that would require a whole new permit through the Army Corps of Engineers to go in through the lake. That event has not been permitted. So we reviewed that risk and feel that's been addressed sufficiently. The next risk is the risk of so during construction, the risk that the tunnel construction induces disturbance at the lake bed or could cause a slurry release into the lake bed. And so those risks there where any sort of tunneling action would cause some disturbance at the lake bed, that would be an environmental risk or in that category. And those risks have been addressed by the following mitigation measures. First of all, the tunnel alignment is primarily a deep alignment in rock. Secondly, a slurry pressure balanced tunnel boring machine has been specified, and that's quite key because it allows very good control at the face of the tunnel where the excavation face, and when you have good control at the excavation face, then you prevent things from happening, like, for example, what we saw on I-75 in Detroit, the tunnel project there. Different type of machine, slurry pressure balance machine, has much better control to prevent situations like that. Also, I should mention here, and it's quite important, and we've discussed throughout the project, there's the risk, I guess the meeting that was primarily on risk that was recorded in September of 2021 really walked through all the decisions made from the onset of the project to select an alignment that mitigates the risks of these items I just mentioned. So the careful attention to items like this by Enbridge's designer, Arup, and their consultants. The extensive constructability reviews from the onset. If you recall, this project started out with a CMGC, Construction Manager General Contractor, procurement approach for the design because constructability issues and risk during construction were had to be addressed from the get-go, and so that has been. So that approach is really sort of state of the art, state of the practice for tunnel construction projects. Those led to us considering the risk of tunneling causing damage to the existing pipeline. And so I'll mention this, but our pipeline expert, Dan Cooper, certainly the expert on this topic, but this is really addressed by the deep alignment in rock, the prescription of the slurry pressure balance TBM to mitigate the risk of surface, lake bed surface where the pipeline lays, and then also the pipeline tolerance to movement, which is really Dan's expertise. This will also be addressed further by monitoring of the pipeline during construction and monitoring of the tunneling, very careful monitoring of the tunneling operations during construction. I think the last one I'll mention then is again, during construction, the risk that a differing site conditions claim would be filed by Enbridge or the contractor against the state of Michigan. And I bring this up with a baseline prior to tunnel agreement. The state of Michigan owns the ground that the tunnel will go through. And one standard challenge with owners on risk to owners on construction projects, tunnel construction projects, is differing site conditions. Contractor runs into or perceives different ground, and it's a cost risk to the owner in that situation. However, in this case, this has been mitigated by the tunnel agreement, which indemnifies the state of Michigan, specifically against a differing site condition, and requires the contractor to indemnify the state of Michigan and the authority in their construction agreement that they will enter into with Enbridge. So summarizing the technical risks before I take questions or turn it over to Ryan, whichever you prefer. Our group really reviewed all these technical risks. I mentioned 8 or 9 of those risks, and are in agreement that those risks, the technical risks, have been adequately mitigated and addressed on the project.
Thanks. Any questions for Dr. Mooney?
I have a couple, Doctor. But I'd like to, just for the public's benefit, make sure that there's an appreciation of why we did this analysis. Obviously, the MSCA is charged with overseeing this project and ensuring that a precious resource, the Great Lakes, is fully protected, as well as other public interests are fully protected. And as a result, your group, other people involved in this process undertook what we consider to be an independent assessment of all of the risks based on a lot of people's experiences and expertise to come up with a list of risks. And we obviously memorialized those risks, identified them, and then as objectively and rigorously and fairly as possible, assess them. It's my belief that, as a result of my participation in this, that process was very salutary. It was thorough, and the ability to visualize not just the mitigation of risk, but the elimination of risks has been, meaningfully discussed and again analyzed. I think that we want to make sure that the idea of, a risk register is a work in progress. An analysis of risk is a work in progress. And to fully eliminate risks, as your presentation suggested, is going to require ongoing interface with Enbridge, with experts, to make sure that things that are planned in the future actually do occur, that the oversight or the IQA involvement or other activities take place as we currently anticipate. So part of the risk mitigation elimination is not just identifying vehicles for mitigation at this time, but ensuring a robust governance protocol and procedures with a good partnership with Enbridge to make sure that we're thinking right now and what we're assuming right now ultimately end up to be correct assumptions. So we do not mean to say, and I trust you will agree with this, that we're basically turning off the lights and declaring victory here. This is an ongoing, iterative process. With that, I do have a question with those qualifiers. You are an expert. You have worked with a team of experts. You just went over a long list of identified risks that you claimed were mitigated or eliminated. But speaking candidly to this authority, but also to the public, are there any risks that are technical in nature that you have great concerns about, or not even great concerns, marginal concerns that would, to use a vernacular term, keep you up at night, that cause you to worry, that make you think that as a steward of the public's interest, all is not well? Or in contrast, are you comfortable with where things are at this time, recognizing that vigilance is going to be needed going forward to ensure that the Great Lakes are protected and the public's interests are protected?
Yeah, I think your 2 points are tied together. I think it's really important that the risk management process is a continuous effort. And the lack of the continuous effort in risk is the risk, right? That's the biggest risk. So we're comfortable as a group with what we've learned through this process, through our review, and with the way those risks, the technical risks, have been addressed and mitigated. But it's really important to maintain that vigilance and level of comfort as we go forward. I think that's the biggest real risk is to maintain that and stay on top of that. There's a long ways to go with this in terms of completing this project and sort of staying attentive to that risks and continuing to identify unknown unknowns or risks and seeing how they ebb and flow is really important. That's the most important piece.
Yeah. And you used the word attentive. I'll use a synonym perhaps, which is ongoing vigilance. That is something that we are all committed to. And as the authority member who participated in the generation of a risk register, as participating in these discussions, one thing I can say that I personally, without having the expertise that any of you have, I'm very comfortable with, is the level of communication and information sharing that has existed not only internally, but also with Enbridge, that has been part of our discussions to make sure information is shared, that issues are jointly understood, and that the issues that have to be identified, again, jointly, are in fact meaningfully vetted. So Enbridge is here today, and I would like to thank it for its engagement, its willingness to meet with us, to have these discussions, to be the partner that this project clearly needs, so that we can all do our job together. And my hope as a authority member is that the relationship that clearly has become enhanced and more robust in the last 3 months or so continues to grow stronger and just continues, period. And I have no doubt that will be the case, but it's something that I think all members of the authority would look forward to make sure that the vigilance that you doctors say is necessary continues, so that we can all look the public in the eye and satisfy it and ourselves that we're doing our duties.
Any other questions for Dr. Mooney? Okay. I think, Ryan, you also are scheduled to address this topic.
Yes. Yes, thank you, Chairman. Thank you. Members, Dr. Mooney spoke specifically to the technical risks. I'm going to speak more about general risks on the project, and I'll just enumerate them and then answer any questions you have. First risk, and actually the top risk identified by priority, is the delay to the Army Corps permit. It keeps the pipelines on the lake bed where they are currently sited. The tunnel project itself was determined to be the most feasible and appropriate mitigation for the risk associated with the location of the pipeline, and delays to implementation of this project perpetuate that risk. Some proposed responses to that include a more active role in the permitting process, which may mitigate that delay risk. Next risk is a depletion of our funding source, the Straits Protection Fund, the only funds legally that the state can utilize for this project. If the state funding runs out, the MSCA cannot meet its obligations or performance duties. The Mackinac Straits Corridor Authority and MDOT, to mitigate this risk, would request additional appropriation for the continuation of this project. Potential discontinuity of MSCA members and staff. Major risk on any infrastructure project where agencies and companies that perform work on behalf of the agency have staff turnover. This can create significant challenges on projects. And with the duration of this project, we've already seen some turnover of members of the MSCA, staff members on the supporting the project, consultant support of the project. We see this as being mitigated by the already existing requirement for comprehensive records of construction quality control and just the activities of the authority and the project. And those are the QA records for construction are required for acceptance of the tunnel by the authority. So we feel that that is adequately mitigated. But we also believe that education about the importance of the continuity in project personnel will help us in this case, and making sure that folks understand the negative impacts of attrition on a project. Finally, we know it's inevitable that there will be attrition on the project. We'll have staff turnover. And we feel that establishing a transition plan for staffing, seeing that coming well in advance, and having a procedure for that will mitigate that risk. Next risk is the change in law or a challenge, amendment, or repeal of Public Act 359, the law that 2018 law that created the Mackinac Straits Corridor Authority. It has been challenged in the past. That could lead to the authority being prohibited from conducting business, meeting its obligations, and performing its duties in accordance with the tunnel agreement. The tunnel agreement does allow, Section 17.1 specifically allows the MSA to terminate the tunnel agreement for circumstances beyond its control, as would be the case in a change of law. Enbridge's obligation to indemnify the authority survives with respect to any claims and liability arising out of or in connection with any work done under the tunnel agreement. Next risk is a lawsuit against the authority, resulting in MSCA having to defend, and the impact is cost and time. There's a law MCL 254-324D, Romanet 5, if anyone wants to look that up, that requires the Attorney General to defend the authority in any matter related to the tunnel, so that is a mitigation. And then the tunnel agreement requires Enbridge to defend, indemnify, protect, and hold harmless the authority, the state of Michigan, and all of its agents and consultants for any claim or liability in connection for work done by Enbridge and its contractor, and for any claim or liability arising out of conditions of state-owned land beneath the straits. The risk exists, but there are mitigations in place. And just to pause briefly about that point that you made earlier, member Dr. Opp, and that Dr. Mooney kind of reiterated, we're not stating that these risks have gone away. We're stating that these risks have been, we've developed a response plan for these risks, and that we will respond according to the response plan that we've developed. They have, in addition to the plan that we've developed, we also will be, and there's a later agenda item that I'll speak to on this topic, hired a commercial consultant to support our risk analysis effort, and that will be a much deeper dive on the commercial aspects, the commercial risks related to Enbridge's construction contract with its contractors. So again, this is really about, and I think you said it well, Member Dr. Opp, that it's an independent review of risk. We believe that the project has been developed in accordance with good risk management processes. And if you go back and look at the record, particularly as Mike mentioned, the 2021 information session, where we've really deliberately described the development of the project from a design perspective, we feel that the risk has been well mitigated from a technical perspective. However, there are still several risks that we want to make sure that we have clarity and agreement about between the parties, within the authority, with its support staff at MDOT, and with the public.
Just to emphasize the point and to illustrate it, obviously we're all concerned about quality management systems, quality control, quality assurance. Dr. Mooney spoke to that. It's going to be our job to make sure that we're satisfied that the contract between Enbridge and whoever the contractor ends up being incorporates language that satisfies all stakeholders, that QA, QC, QMS, are all, contractually zipped up so that we know that there is less likely to be material disputes during construction as to how those systems will and must operate. And that is part of our keeping, eyes on the prize, working as partners with others to make sure that if something does need to be reduced to further writing, or there needs to be an MOU, there's an opportunity to do that so that we can all, I just use this term, sleep well at night. So that's just an example of what we need to do to make sure that all of these issues have in fact been mitigated, and that there's written memorialization such that none of this is faith-based.
Good seg to the next risk. The tunnel agreement has within it a very broadly defined delay event, which we think could lead to a disagreement between the parties, and potentially poses a risk of an exposure to the state related to delay and the costs and the damages that may result from that. And our proposal is to clarify and amend that delay event clause in an MOU or acknowledgement document. Next item is a lack of clarity regarding who owns some of the and has access to some of the property that would be required to access the tunnel. And so similarly, we believe we'll need to clarify and provide documentation such as an MOU or an acknowledgement to clarify that. Circumstances Next risk is the circumstances that may result in a partially built tunnel. For whatever reason, an insurmountable technical challenge or Enbridge default, unlikely scenarios. But again, just those things that you have to run to ground as you deliberate on risk. And so the termination provisions in Article 17 would apply here. And Enbridge is solely responsible for the costs associated with that condition, the condition of an abandonment. If the authority terminates, or if Enbridge voluntarily chose to cease operations during of the tunnel during design or construction, Enbridge is responsible for all costs associated with that, and would reimburse the MSCA its costs of the decommissioning that's required. And the final risk I'll note is that Enbridge may terminate its lease agreement before the 99-year term, leaving the state to continue and contract for maintenance operations for the remainder of the term and for the remainder of the useful life of the asset. The tunnel agreement provides for decommissioning and termination clauses, and the lease agreement obligates Enbridge for any decommissioning costs, for all decommissioning costs. And there's a kind of waterfall of approvals that would happen prior to that, including a work plan for the authority's approval. And also, again, the MSCA deposits into the Straits Protection Fund an amount equal to the estimated cost to decommission and perform that work for the Straits Corridor Authority.
I would just like to bring up, with all of these risks, they are part of, as you said, Member Doctoroff, an ongoing iterative process. And the risk planning documents are an attorney-client privilege document, as I've had quite a bit of input on the, the legal sources and remedies. It's also a risk planning document that is exempt from disclosure under FOIA. And just want to bring that up, that what this discussion has been is just an overview of some of the things that we've been doing, and not a final document. It's preliminary to final decisions that this authority might make, but would not be an actual, it's more of a draft, an ongoing draft.
Any other questions or comments with respect to this particular agenda item?
I'd like to ask Ryan a question, but after underscoring a point that's really important, I personally believe, that stresses what Dr. Mooney said earlier. Every infrastructure project has risks. The question is whether those risks are being mitigated and then eliminated, and whether or not project overseers have confidence that that's the case, and whether or not the parties are getting along in such a way and applicable governance structures have been established so that everyone can rest very, very well that these risks are going to be or have been eliminated. I don't think anyone should anyone should be in any way troubled by the fact that standing alone theoretical risks have been identified. The real thing is, are they being mitigated and then eliminated? And since, as your comments suggested, Ryan, a significant part of the mitigation elimination process entails partnership engagement, dialogue with other parties, including Enbridge. I'd like your opinion at this point as to how that's going. What type of relationship do we, in your opinion, have with Enbridge at this time? Is it one that is trusting at this point? Are they listening to what we're having to say? Are they responding to what we have to say at this time in a way that satisfies you, or not? Are you seeing problems, recalcitrance, or anything like that? How would you assess what's going on?
I would say that the partnership is very good, and it's been a collaborative effort. I would say that we had a lot of very long and challenging conversations on these topics, and satisfied ourselves through exhaustive discussion of many of these risks, that everything that can be done to respond and mitigate these risks is being done, or there's a plan for doing that. So, and I would say they've been extremely cooperative, and I would say that that Enbridge has been has demonstrated commitment to this project for many years, and continue to demonstrate that commitment to the project. And when we raised issues that were challenging to them, they provided the information that we had requested.
And I'll ask one follow-up question to that, which I think based on your answer, I know the answer to, but I just want to make sure. In your opinion, and maybe Dr. Mooney or others, would have their own opinions, but in your opinion, do you think Enbridge respects the role of the authority and what we're doing to engage in the oversight activities that have been discussed today?
So I have a couple points in response to that. I think yes. I think Enbridge, again, being committed to the project and having a deep commitment to seeing the project completed, they want to comply with the authority, and so they've been extremely cooperative. I would also say that, MDOT, my employer, develops and implements infrastructure projects frequently, routinely, and does risk management routinely. Are we 100% aligned on every topic? No. Will there be disagreements in the future about issues? Yes. Do we have a plan in place and a structure that I think will allow for as successful a collaboration on this project as possible? I do at this time. I think there's work to be done, and I think we've identified the work that needs to be done. And as you suggested earlier, that was the first step in this process, but we're committed to putting that process in place and executing on it.
I mean, just for the sake of candor and openness, I'd like to give Enbridge the opportunity to address anything that has been said here, whether it comes to characterizing your relationship with us, so that we can be assured, the public can be assured, that there's no, at this point, material misalignment between authority and Enbridge.
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity. Anna Mooney with Enbridge. No, I think the characterization is accurate. We've really appreciated the partnership with the Corridor Authority, the exhaustive, I think, as Ryan described them as, conversations, and our continued commitment to collaborating and working together on this process moving forward. So, no, I don't have any further comments or anything really to differ from what was stated.
Dr. Mooney, you and your team have been incredible in terms of your identification and grappling with risks. Do you have anything to add to the discussion in terms of how the parties are getting along, how they're engaging, such that either make you feel comforted or troubled, or anything? Yeah, sure.
I would say that the interaction's been really good. I mean, I think in engineering communities and and discussions, and I think it's been a really cordial group and a very open and engaging group, and just working the problems, trying to solve the problems. And so I think the communication's been very good.
And again, thanks to you and your team for the incredible work you've been doing on the risks.
It's definitely a team effort.
Yep.
So.
Said team. Thank you.
I have a couple observations about the discussion we've just had that I want to identify. The first is an observation about what Ray said, that the maintenance of an iterative risk register is something that would not be subject to FOIA. I think there would be some value in generating a document that is publicly available that provides summarization at a level of detail that doesn't create the types of concerns that FOIA addressed through providing exemptions for certain things. And certainly I can envision that there are documents as part of a risk register that it would not be beneficial to have as public documents. But nonetheless, I think some recordation that provides something that the public can review and digest as part of this process would be helpful. And I'll kind of leave that thought there with the committee that is performing this type of analysis to think about and think about how such a document might be created. The second thing is there was reference at one point that there may be items that arise in the future that would need memoranda of understanding to give further clarity to both sides on particular items. And if we contemplate that as a mechanism for addressing potential risk issues down the road, we should give some thought to how that MOU process would occur, how it would be authorized, et cetera. So I just leave those as my two observations to what has been presented here. Andy, I wanted to thank you for your much more in-depth participation in this process and the value that you bring from prior projects in reviewing risk registers and advocating their creation and bringing that experience to this project. That's all I have for this particular agenda item. Anything else, or are we on to project permitting updates? All right. Ray, why don't you start with where we are in the MPSC proceedings?
Yes, the short answer is we are still waiting for the Public Service. Short answer is we are still waiting for the Public Service Commission to issue a decision. Recall that on July 7th of 2022, the Public Service Commission remanded the matter back to the ALJ to take additional proofs, particularly on the likelihood of an explosion and the ability of the tunnel to withstand that explosion, and the probability that there would be an explosion. And so in March of, in February of 23 this year, direct testimony was filed. In March, rebuttal testimony was filed, including Daniel Cooper's rebuttal testimony. And then there were motions to strike at the end of March. And on April 11th, 12th, 13th, and 14th, the ALJ heard the motions and made rulings, and also took cross-examination of all of the witnesses. The briefs were filed in May, and then in, I believe it was May 20-something, the record was submitted to the Public Service Commission for a decision. The commission meets for the rest of the year, October 12th, October 24th, November 9th, December 1st, and December 21st of this year, and potentially at any of those meetings, public meetings, it could issue its decision.
Okay. Any questions for Ray or the MPSC proceeding? Next is an update regarding the Army Corps of Engineer permitting process. Ryan.
Yes, so I met with the Corps Thursday of last week to get a detailed update with Margaret Barendess of MDOT, Manager of Environmental Services Section, and a NEPA expert to help me understand a little better. And they confirmed that there's not been much change since last we spoke. March 2026 is the deadline for conclusion of the NEPA process. They're currently developing alternatives with Enbridge, evaluating Section 106 cultural resources, and some others that they are yet to be determined in cooperation with Enbridge. They're working through those, but also includes federally listed species, Enbridge's biological assessment, and working through government-to-government consultation. And that's about it.
Okay. Questions for Ryan?
I might have a question, but I'll hold off until Enbridge talks about the letter.
Okay. Well, why don't we move to that agenda item, and we can kind of merge the discussion of both. We have reflected on the agenda the August 18, 2023 correspondence from Enbridge regarding the Army Corps permitting process. Were there comments that a representative of the company wanted to make with respect to that correspondence or the process?
Hi, yes, I'll make some brief, just kind of maybe overview or summary comments about the letter that you received. And then I do have with us another representative from Enbridge that's available to answer additional questions should you have them about the letter and maybe the process with the Army Corps. So I've been before you now at several meetings, giving kind of similar updates that Ryan just did. I think June was the last meeting that we had here, which I gave a pretty high level update on where we were with permitting. As was mentioned, we are looking at I think right after our meeting in June, we had an updated EIS schedule that came from the Army Corps. So we really felt that it was helpful, kind of everything we just had in our last conversation over the risk analysis process and really permitting and delays in permitting being a big part of our trying to mitigate against risk, right, in the timeline for the project. So we felt it was necessary at this point, so on the August 18th letter, to really catalog and categorize those issues that we've been having over the last several years, really most recently in the last couple of months, I'll say, with the Army Corps of Engineers. So that's what you'll find in the August 18th letter that was referenced. We welcome the collaboration and partnership that we've talked about with the Corridor Authority, but maybe I'll just stop there. I know you've read the letter yourself, and I'm happy to stop there. And as I said, I have Tom Schwartz, who's our Senior Vice President for major projects for Enbridge, this obviously being one of our major projects. So he's well versed, and the letter was signed by him as well, so he's probably most appropriate to answer any questions you may have.
I have just one question. At the June meeting, we asked about legislation that had just passed It was at that time 48 hours old.
Sure.
So there wasn't really, I think, a fair opportunity for Enbridge to evaluate whether that new legislation impacted potentially the deadlines under which the Army Corps would engage in their process. Can you or another representative speak as to what your current view is on whether that legislation impacted, from the company's perspective, the deadlines under which the Army Corps are obligated to operate?
Yeah, I'm happy to give a response to that. We did also talk about that in our in a separate letter, in the August 11th letter, which I think you covered briefly in old business, but we did, as you said, it'd been a short time period of when we were here in June, but we have taken a look. Our legal team has taken a look at that. Believes that there is some ability to shorten the timeline under the confines of the Debt Ceiling Reduction Act, but I don't know if those beliefs are, or I'll say this, I don't know if there's that agreement with the Army Corps of Engineers. So,
Not necessarily a meeting of the minds.
correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Is that,
Any other questions for Enbridge?
I think Tom's going to speak.
Okay.
Good morning. Just for the record, my name is Tom Schwartz, Senior Vice President, Liquids Pipelines, Strategic Projects and Partnerships for Enbridge. I'll just make a quick follow-up response to that. We have met with the Corps since the new legislation you referred to, and I think it's fair to say there is not a meeting of the minds on the impact of that legislation.
Did you have other observations you wanted to make?
I think I'll just
or
open it up for questions at this point.
Okay.
You've got the letter and Anna's opening comments.
Did you have questions? Go ahead.
I think it might be good, just so folks know what we're talking about, and I know that you're the signatory of the letter. Do you feel comfortable summarizing what the letter says, and if so, would you?
Sure, I'll summarize at a high level. Really, what the letter is describing is our growing frustration with the process that the Army Corps is following to permit this project. It starts with the beginning. We're well over 3 years into it since we applied. We applied for what we thought, in all circumstances, would be both robust and expeditious permit processes. And that's largely been the case in other situations with the state permitting agencies in particular. The Corps process has not met those expectations. It has been fraught with changes in course and process with no explanation, certainly nothing to us. So most recently we had a survey work that was supposed to have been completed under an agreed plan last year that got delayed until this year based on events that we didn't think warranted that delay. An agreement was reached in the beginning of June to try to get the work done this year. That agreement seemed to address all concerns. We had another event happen at the end of July that's referenced in the letter, where we were again stopped from completing the work that should have been completed well before now if we had just continued to follow a new process with a new technique that hadn't been raised until, and certainly not pushed and required to be part of the approved plan. that just introduced another delay, and if we fail to get that work done before the snow flies this year, we're either going to need to get a change to the plan approved to work in the winter, or we'll have another delay until next year. I think that was a moment where we decided we needed some help.
The implication that seems like a straightforward one is that by delaying the EIS process, or by its being protracted, that the net effect of that is protracting the existence of the risk that the tunnel project is intended to eliminate, namely, taking out of use two pipelines at the bottom of Lake Michigan that are subject to anchor strike or other types of exposure, which obviously is a concern, as Ryan mentioned. It's at the very top of our non-technical risks that have been identified by the authority. Question, Tom, did you make that point to the Army Corps? And if so, was there a response? And if so, what was it?
We, well, it certainly made the point in our meeting with the Corps. I'd have to.
I'm referring to the meeting right now.
Yeah, okay, we did make that point. I can't tell you verbatim what the response was, but there was a comment that, a reminder that no applicant is entitled to a permit, which is certainly a valid point. That's true. But I go back to my initial comment that we assumed and expected a robust and expeditious permitting process. Robust because that's a given, and we expect that, and we're happy to, prosecute a robust review. The expeditious part we expected because of what you just identified, which is that the whole purpose of this project is to reduce environmental risk and to remove the pipes that are currently operating on the bottom of the straits from operation, which seems to be a view that all governments and all, generally, the population want. So, so we're frustrated and perplexed by the unorthodox process that we're experiencing with respect to the Corps permitting of this project.
Is there anything that you feel comfortable or you think would not violate any informal or formal agreement of confidentiality vis-a-vis your discussions with the Army Corps that you feel like you could share with us that might shed some light on the reasons for the timing of the EIS review and what you've referred to, and not surprisingly, as a delay or a series of them?
Yeah, well, I mean, the reality is, and we all know this, that the tunnel project is controversial. There are many parties that do not want the tunnel to be built. They have their reasons for that. I'm not going to get into that. Many of them are providing the comments that are that the Army Corps is acting upon to delay the project. That they're the comments that are resulting in the decisions to change the process from time to time. So that's simply a reality that we discussed with the Corps. And
was there any assurance or any suggestion about trying to speed things up made by the Corps or not?
We did discuss the fact, as referenced in the letter as well, that there are elements of the existing schedule that they have set forth that are sequential, that we believe could and often are handled in parallel. And in the course of that discussion, they identified or offered that they have been reviewing their schedule and had some potential enhancements to expedite the schedule that they would discuss with us. And I believe we have a meeting tomorrow with the Corps in that regard.
You, at the end of your comments, said that you needed, I think I'm using your word, help, or you wanted or requesting help from this authority. So, you know, there was a newspaper report that falsely suggested that there had been discussions about suing or bringing a lawsuit against the Corps. I know I personally have never entertained that idea and was quite surprised to read it. But with that clarified, what help do you think, well, what help, if any, are you asking for at this point?
Well, I think that the help the most obvious one would be for the authority to participate in the permitting process in whatever way possible. To provide the voice of the ultimate owner and a very interested party with expertise to lend, as we've heard about so far all morning. The authority and the staff here have lots to offer to the process, and I think that if that were brought in to the Corps process, that would help, because it would provide more than just Enbridge advocating in a positive fashion for the project to get underway.
I have absolutely no firsthand or really even secondhand information as to the cause of any delay at the Army Corps of Engineers. And I just want that made very clear. And, you know, I imagine the issue of help is of legal nature, which is what I believe we might be discussing in the upcoming closed session. But back to your letter, you mention in your letter at the end that the review process based on existing precedent further exacerbates the already existing delay event situation under the tunnel agreement and creates additional unnecessary uncertainty with respect to the GLTP in-service date. Again, I don't want to ask you to say anything that you're certainly not prepared or comfortable saying, but could you expound on what that means?
Well, I think it was referred to earlier that the tunnel agreement has a delay event concept that arises when there's more than a year delay in receipt of a permit. I mean, we've been in this process for several years already. The schedule that the Corps identified and was referred to earlier as a deadline of March of 2026. I don't think they would use the word deadline, but I could be wrong. I certainly haven't had them describe it that way. That schedule included many milestones that were identified as well, and the reality is that many of them have been missed, and not just by a week or two, but by months. So we have, I mean, I hate to make a lot more comment in that regard with a meeting that's coming up tomorrow where we may get lots of information. So this is what we observed and relayed to the Corps officials when we met with them a few weeks ago. And I just think all of that is continuing to exacerbate the delay event under the agreement.
I personally have no further questions, but I would like to ask Ryan, since you've met with the Army Corps as well, was this issue brought up? If so, was there a response? Can you talk about that?
So first, they said deadline. So, and they said March 26, and that was developed in collaboration with the applicant, Enbridge. And they referred to a large volume of work between now and that deadline. They didn't give any specific explanation, and I asked it very similarly because it sounds like a long time, right? And the time period between application and scoping was comparatively long, and the duration of the study itself. So they didn't offer any explanation other than the volume of work that the study requires.
And just to make sure people are not jumping to false conclusions, you know, it might be an inference that there's something political going on here. I have not heard anything to suggest that this is a political issue. Has either of you heard anything to suggest that this is political as opposed to administrative, bureaucratic, or anything else along those lines? Because I don't want the public jumping to assumptions about what's causing a delay, if that's the right word. Ryan?
I don't think I've heard that, but I think it is very much as Mr. Schwartz mentioned earlier, a project that has very deeply kind of entrenched or involved interests on both sides. So
I agree. I don't have any specific reason to say it's political in the sense of that there is political interference. I stand by my prior term, controversial.
Okay. That's it.
Any other discussion of this agenda item? If not, I want to reiterate, perhaps even more strongly, what Andy just indicated. Our next agenda item is a closed session to consider legal options in the U.S. Army Corps permitting process. I had a discussion with a Detroit News reporter about this last week. I thought I unambiguously indicated that we were not considering any type of legal action against the Army Corps, but I did also indicate that I had not received the attorney-client memo from Ray Howd with respect to this issue. Let me reiterate now, I don't envision a legal action being brought in which the Corridor Authority would be a participant with respect to the Army Corps permitting process. So to the extent that there was any ambiguity in my earlier discussion on that topic, I hope I've removed it. With that, I will entertain a motion with respect to going into closed session to consider an attorney-client privilege memoranda provided by counsel. I think it's Section 8H of the Open Meetings Act, which would authorize us to go into closed session for that purpose. It's been moved. All in favor? I think, if I remember the Open Meetings Act, we actually have to record the votes of each member. So, Mr. Doctoroff?
Yes?
Yes.
Also?
Yes.
All right. And I also say yes. So we have a 3-0 determination to go into closed session. The time is now 11:40. I'm not certain how long this is expected to take, but I can envision it, famous last words, being more than half an hour. we're adjourned for the closed session. All right, it is now 12:30, and the authority will come back into session. Our next agenda item is new business number 5, construction contractor selection process and general progress update, and we'll hear from Enbridge.
Yeah, so I just have a brief update on the construction contractor. As I was before you in June here, just a reminder that we did receive the bids for the construction phase of the project back in November of 2022. We've spent the better part of this year both a technical and commercial review of those contracting bids, those bids that have been before us, and we are, as was a lot of the conversation we just had around permitting as well, but just trying to work through the challenges in selecting a contractor while we are faced with some uncertainty and timelines with permitting, just stemming from, again, a lot of our conversations that we've already covered with the Army Corps. And so we are still in a position, we anticipate being able to award a contract by the end of this year, so by the end of 2023. I know that as we've acknowledged or talked about, there's a ability for the authority to observe in that process, so I'm happy to answer any questions, though, at this time.
Member Dr. Off.
Yeah, likelihood of it being done by the end of the year, high, medium, low?
I would say the conversations are, taking place day to day, weekly, so we anticipate being able to award that by the end of the year.
Yeah. I'm certainly, particularly not in this forum, going to ask for any acknowledgement or concession from Enbridge. I will reiterate, as the next 2 agenda items suggest, that we are on the verge of retaining a commercial consultation expert. We are on the verge of getting out the IQA RFP. It will be, a real help, a boon to our collaborative relationship if those experts and indeed, others from the MSCA, like Dr. Mooney, have an opportunity to engage to address the risks appropriately in a way that presumably would not be burdensome unreasonably, so that we can assure ourselves that before any contract is signed, that to the extent appropriate, risks have been considered and addressed. Again, I'm not asking for any acknowledgement on your part at this point. I am just saying, personally speaking, I think that's really important.
Understood.
Other comments or questions? Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks. Our next agenda item is the IQA contractor procurement. Ryan, you're up.
Thank you, Chairman. The RFP is ready to post. We are aligned on level of effort and cost, and I request approval to post the RFP.
Okay.
Or I would request your consideration of a motion.
Okay, you're requesting a motion for approval of issuance of the RFP?
Correct.
Okay. First, any questions?
Well, Ryan, you might just, for the public's sake and for the panel's sake, just let folks know the process that you've gone through, that your team has gone through to come up with the scope of work and make sure that it's appropriately funded, et cetera.
Sure, Member Dr. Off. Well, we drafted the scope based on a typical construction quality control oversight process. This is a different approach. It's more of a, again, as the name suggests, independent quality assurance contractor versus a quality assurance or a quality control contract, which would be more typical for MDOT. That said, we worked through the document to ensure that it aligned to the tunnel agreement, which describes the independent quality assurance contractor role, and that it in fact was also aligned to the a memo of understanding that we have with Enbridge related to the interaction between Enbridge's contractor, their quality assurance personnel, and our independent quality assurance contractor, access to records, presence on the site, and how those parties would interact to allow for oversight. So that has all been done. Additionally, because Enbridge is funding the independent quality assurance contractor, we walked through the level of effort that was expected and the anticipated cost, and they were in agreement.
Okay. Any other questions or discussions regarding that agenda item? All right. Did we actually vote? Motion to approve issuance of the RFP?
Yeah, I make a motion to approve the issuance of RFP for an IQAC.
All right. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Okay.
Motion carries. Next item is Commercial and Transaction Risk Advisor Procurement. Ryan, you're still up.
Thank you, Chairman. At our previous meeting, it was requested that I procure a commercial advisor. We onboarded KPMG to support the transaction risk analysis function, essentially to look at Enbridge's construction contract and review any residual risk to the state stemming from it, as allowed by the tunnel agreement. They have joined, and we've requested that they retain a sub-consultant to look at commercial issues in the document, and they have procured that sub-consultant. That sub-consultant is Nossman LLP. So we'd like to enter into that subcontract with the sub-consultant.
So what you're indicating is do we actually approve the retention of the sub-consultant?
That wasn't contemplated in the original motion.
I'm sorry, my question is, so we approve the contractual relationship with the consultant. My question is, are we also exercising jurisdiction over who that consultant retains, so that we're approving that individual as well? Or is it the consultant that has the discretion as to which sub-consultants they engage with?
I believe they were authorized to do that. I bring it to your attention, not for a vote, unless you believe it's warranted.
Typically, my experience is we don't necessarily weigh in on that unless there is an express indication that we would be intending to do so. I don't know if others have an observation about it. Okay.
Sorry, I didn't mean to muddy the water there. Just
No,
keeping you abreast of the.
I appreciate it. Okay. On to the next agenda item, which is the contract with a Special Assistant Attorney General, right?
Yes, I was with the Attorney General's office through March of 2021, and I became involved with representing the Mackinac Straits Corridor Authority in February of 2020. Attended my first meeting, and then I retired from the Attorney General's office in March of 21. And since that time, I have been acting as a Special Assistant Attorney General. And my contract expires at the end of this year, December 31st. And due to more time I need to spend with the grandkids and family and try to really enjoy what retirement's supposed to be, I will not be renewing my contract.
See, you omitted the other reason, which is that the board's becoming more ornery and demanding. So thanks for your tact. But I have enjoyed, Ray and I go back, we both worked in the Attorney General's office. I've enjoyed working with you both there. Actually, we didn't interact that much there, but I certainly knew of you back in those days. But I've enjoyed working with you in your capacity as a special assistant to this board. I do want to talk about the process by which you would be replaced. I think it is actually the Attorney General's office who selects the special assistant AG, but with our imprimatur on that at a subsequent point. I think you've already communicated to the AG's office that you would not be renewing. We, for reasons I'll get into in a minute, are envisioning another meeting in December. If you could come back by then with an indication from the AG's office as to who the replacement might be for our consideration, I think that would be helpful.
Yes, and I just wanted to say that I have really enjoyed this, this work. It's just a fascinating project. I have indicated that, I would think the sooner that a replacement could come on board, the better, and that in the next 3 months that I would have a chance to work with them and her or him, and try to make sure that there's a smooth transition.
Okay. Anything else with respect to that item?
I just want to echo your comments, Mr. Chairman. Ray, thank you very much for your hard work, and you're incredibly attentive, detail-focused, and responsive, and you will be missed. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Next item on the agenda is consultant contract update. Ryan.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I have a few contracts that I rely heavily on, and I need to extend them for time, or would propose to extend them for time, I should say. The first is Delve Underground, formerly McMillan Jacobs. They supported the Eagle permitting work and continued to support as an additional tunnel expert advisor, and would request extension of a term of 5 years.
This one is in a slightly awkward procedural posture because I have already signed it. And my understanding was that we had to do so before this fiscal year began. Prospectively, I'm not particularly comfortable in signing contracts without the authority having had an opportunity to review and make a determination as to whether renewal of that contract is something that collectively the authority is comfortable in doing. But I'm explaining to you why I did what I did. So the motion to approve it puts me, but it would give me some comfort if we did so. Anyway.
We'll think about it, right? Do you want to make a motion? I don't. I move to approve the contract and to ratify whatever Paul did. So,
All in favor?
aye.
Aye. Thank you.
Similarly, because of year end and the approach of year end happening between meetings, I should have premised this on that, Paul. I apologize for that awkward position. But additionally, the administrator of our Contract Services Division at MDOT executed 2 extensions for the other 2 contracts. The HT Engineering, who employs Dan Cooper, our pipeline expert, and Mike Mooney. Both of those contracts, because of the year end coming, are, but I think if you decided that you did not want to extend those contracts and you wanted to rescind that extension, you could do so. But similarly, I
Okay.
request extension of those contracts as well.
I'm at least personally in a less awkward situation because I didn't sign either of these, but for the same reason and because, I mean, we talked earlier about the issue of the risk of staffing transition. These obviously are 2 individuals with whom we have invested an incredible amount of past involvement with, experience, and to not approve these 2 contracts, in my view, would be a serious mistake given the level of involvement that they have in the project. So I'd entertain motions for approval of both of those.
I'll move, and I'll also, again, echo what you're saying, and I'll say it quite explicitly. I've worked over the last few months very closely with Dr. Mooney and Dan, and they're invaluable and they're awesome, and we're thrilled to have them on their team and glad to approve an extension to keep them there.
Okay.
So moved.
All in favor? Aye?
Aye.
Those are both approved. But there is an observation going forward to the extent we have contracts coming up, to make sure we spot those at least a meeting in advance of when either renewals or contract execution would need to be done. Like I said, I'm much more comfortable with having the participation of the full authority in making decisions about either entry or renewal of contracts.
So, Chairman, there's one more item, not for approval today, but looking forward to our next meeting. Dr. Mooney is about to exhaust his funds. I think he's at 85%, and we first engaged him in 2018 for a term of 5 years. We just extended him, but he will need additional funds. I'll bring that request with all the detail necessary to make that decision, or if you choose to make a motion to approve that at our next meeting.
He has enough funding to run between now and an anticipated December meeting?
He will have to. So.
Okay. All right. That brings me, okay, so we're at the end of the new business agenda items, but I have a couple things that I wanted to identify. The first is I found myself yesterday, sitting in my hotel room reading through the statute that actually authorizes our existence. And one of the things that statute requires is that we issue an annual report that summarizes the conduct of the authority. If you want to review it, I think it's section 14D2. And we have not issued an annual report for this year. I would like between now and end of year for us to generate such a report and approve it, which begs the question of requiring an additional meeting this calendar year. So I'd like to set a meeting in December, likely down in the Detroit area, for the purposes of doing that. I think we can confer offline to determine when exactly in December that meeting would occur, but that item would need to be placed on it. And I also made reference to the contract issuance and renewal issues, that to the extent that there are any additional contracts that would be appropriate to review for issuance or renewal in December could also be placed on the agenda item, as well as the budgetary status of was it Dr. Mooney who you said was running a little tight? Okay. So I'd like those items to be placed on the meeting agenda for a December meeting, and we will determine between now and then when exactly in December it would occur. Other items before we go to public comment? All right, then we are at public comment. Public is encouraged to address the authority. If we have an indication of how many people have signed up, I typically am either more or less strict about adherence to a 3-minute limit, depending on how many people have signed up.
5 people have signed up, and then there may be more who would like to address the authority after those 5.
Okay. So, and the first person for,
Angie.
and while Angie's coming up to the podium, I'll just indicate I'm not a believer in strict adherence to 3-minute time frames unless it becomes well in excess. But
He's already pegged me, I can tell.
yeah. But I wanted to let you know that in advance so you don't feel like at 3 minutes, boom, the hammer's coming down.
And after Angie is Keith.
Okay.
Well, I'm a retired teacher, 36 years, so that was good for you to count that out. I'm speaking with multiple hats on today. First of all, thank you for volunteering or being appointed to do this. It's a huge task. I live in Mackinac City. I own a home on the waterfront. I am also a volunteer for many community organizations, of which we are very excited to be supported and be part of the process of what you're doing, because it's going to affect our town immensely. So I'd like to thank you for that point. I have engaged talking with Enbridge employees, working with their programs, and they assist us in several ways. One just happened recently, which you will like because it's fall. They had to clean out a right-of-way, and I looked at the right-of-way on our public park, and I said, wouldn't it be cool if we could just put wildflowers on the public park? And he looked at me and says, you want seeds? We'll get you seeds. So guess what I'll be doing? It's planting some seeds this fall, so when you come back, you'll be able to see them. So I'm just here in support of what Enbridge is trying to do to make this be a positive impact on our community. Thank you.
Which park is it?
You want me to say all the hats? Heritage Village Park, it's a city park that's run by the Mackinac Area Historical Society, and it's on the west side of town across from the Headlands and just down the street from McGulpin Point.
Okay.
You're welcome to come look at the flowers anytime.
I do enjoy meandering around the local area the day
Wonderful.
before these meetings usually, so that's why I asked.
Well, I'm wearing my Mackinac Women's Club shirt because we have an open house at 5, and I wasn't sure how long your meeting was going to go, so I planned ahead. So, thank you.
Thanks. Keith, I think, was next.
Keith is next, followed by John.
Good afternoon. My name is Keith Ginnup, and I want to thank you for the opportunity to speak today. I'm a resident of Monroe Township in Sheboygan County. The Enbridge pipeline runs through our family farm, and we have had no complaints whatsoever over the years. They're constantly monitoring and checking the property in which their pipeline runs. I'm also a member of the Inverness Fire Department, captain for several years. I am also president of the Sheboygan County Firefighters Association. The Inverness Fire Department has received not only generous donations over the years from Enbridge, but they have also come to our department and trained us and gave us updates on what is happening with Enbridge. As far as the president of the Sheboygan County Firefighters Association, we have received generous grants as well as trainings. Enbridge has also had several other departments in our county that have received grants and donations from Enbridge. I am also the manager of the Sheboygan County Fair, and for the last 3 years, the county fair has received over $15,000 in sponsorship from Enbridge. Enbridge is not only a good neighbor to us and protective and safety-minded company, we also help many organizations throughout our community. I personally would like to thank Enbridge for their continued support throughout our county and our communities. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next up is John.
Good afternoon. My name is John Kostick, and I'm from Hudson Township. And for those of you that don't know, Hudson Township is about 45 miles west of here. It's a beautiful little township. We're composed of 69 square miles. About 84% of that is state land. I moved up here 7 years ago from the Stockbridge area. My first interaction with Enbridge was in the Stockbridge area. They put a pipeline through real close to my house. Very, very impressed with the quality of work, the respect that they had for the environment, and that's why I moved up here, because Hudson Township is so pristine. Like I said, we're composed 87% state land. We have one of the most beautiful campgrounds, I believe, in the state, Garnet Lake Campground. It's beautiful. It's just beautiful. I love what Enbridge does. I happen to be Hudson Township Supervisor. Myself and our entire township board are 100% behind this project. We really are. I consider myself the unofficial ambassador of Enbridge and the tunnel project. I speak very highly of it no matter where I go. Everybody that knows me can tell you that. And I'm so impressed with Enbridge because of their focus. They got 3 focus areas that I'm aware of: health and safety, environment, and community. And I saw that today. This is the first meeting that I've attended. I saw that today with the authorities' attention to detail and just the risk assessments. It's fantastic. Keep up the great work.
Thank you.
The next 2 are Al, followed by Merlin, and then that will conclude the people who have signed up.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Al Garvelia. I'm the old fart that John replaced in Hudson Township. I was the township supervisor there for 15 years. Enjoyed it. Had quite a few different dealings with Enbridge. 2 pipelines run straight through our township from east to west, Great Lakes and Enbridge. But they've been good to us, and I appreciate the committee's due diligence on this, and I appreciate all that Enbridge is doing to try and keep our community safe. I'm a Uper through and through. My family was, my great-grandmother's buried on the island, and this area is important to me, but I think that encapsulating that pipeline in a tunnel is the right thing to do. Patience is not one of my virtues, so that's kind of why I'm here. I'm nosy to see when are we going to get her done. So thank you.
Thanks.
The last individual is passing, so you can open it to see if anyone else would like to
All right.
comment.
Do we have any others who are interested in speaking during public comment? All right. This is the beauty of telling people that they can take more than 3 minutes is, I think we got through everybody in about 3 minutes. So, thank you. The meeting is adjourned.